Welcome back to Why Is That, Dad? The show where we take your everyday observations and drill down into the surprising science, deep history, and fascinating culture behind them with the help of my curious kids. Today we are continuing our home series, all from the lens of my 1815 home that has been added onto over the years. Last week we talked about the foundation, and today we're talking about the skeleton, the frame. Today, Cecilia is joining me in the questioner's seat. You've done a little bit of work in this house with me. You laid down the carpet tiles in the master bedroom walk-in closet. Was that fun?
Yes, it was, Daddy. I really enjoyed picking out the different colors, laying them down, and cutting them with a razor blade. I like cutting them with a razor blade the most.
I'm glad you didn't cut your finger, too. So I'm glad the master bedroom is mostly done. Now, Dominic, Grandpa, and I can work on the floor. Unfortunately, the original floor had to go. See these huge floor joists?
Yeah, they're practically small tree trunks. Some of these still have their bark on them. That's pretty neat, but you replaced them with much thinner but deeper pieces of wood. Why is that, Dad?
Good question, Cecilia. Although there is less wood, these floor joists can actually hold more weight and with less bounce. With a lot of the structure still exposed, it's a good time to go over the history of framing. Our house is a bit of a Frankenstein house with the living room from 1815, the kitchen wing from the 1940s, and the new work we're doing now, and the master bedroom addition. It has building from 3 different eras. So, to answer your question, in today's episode we aren't just talking about wood. We're getting into the 3 revolutions of American framing, the different forces at play in a home, the tragic extinction of the American chestnut, and the reason why a 2x4 isn't just a 2x4. So to answer your question simply, the reason the beams are huge in the living room and small in the kitchen is that technology changed the value of a nail. In the 1815 living room, nails were handmade and expensive, so builders used massive timbers locked together like puzzle pieces without nails. By the time the kitchen was built in the 1940s, machines made cheap nails and sawmills could cut small, standardized boards. We stopped building with trees and started building with lumber. And that's it in a nutshell.
Oh, that's simple. Episode's over. Thanks for tuning in, everybody.
No, not yet. There's a lot more to it than that. We'll get into the 3 different eras of framing in a bit, but that's the simple answer.
I know, JK, Dad. Plus, you didn't explain how a smaller piece of wood can hold up the same weight. It isn't about nails being expensive versus cheap, because these joints aren't even nailed in. They're held in by gravity. They just fit in these notches. But it really makes me wonder, if these wooden joists are so much smaller than old ones, how do they hold more weight? Trees haven't gotten stronger over time. It feels like the big heavy beams in the living room would be safer, yet most of the houses, with the exception of the dinosaur of the living room and the boys' room, is made from sticks. How do the physics actually work?
It does look flimsy compared to the old timber, doesn't it? But it works because of how we manipulate forces. Whether it's the 1815 living room or the 1940s kitchen, every house is fighting a constant, invisible battle against external forces, so the wood frame has to have several strengths that combat these forces. When engineers design a house, they view it as a battle between the structure and the physical forces trying to knock it down. The frame is the skeleton that must win this battle every single day. The primary enemy is gravity, which creates a downward force known as a load. This includes the dead load, the constant weight of the house itself, like the roof, walls, and floors, and the live load, the changing weight of people, furniture, and snow. The frame resists this crushing weight through compression strength. The vertical studs in the wall act like columns. Wood is naturally very strong when compressed along its grain. However, gravity isn't the only threat. The house must also withstand lateral or sideways forces like strong winds or earthquakes if you live in California. These forces create shear, which tries to slide the top of the house over the bottom, turning rectangles into parallelograms, a process called racking. To fight this, the frame relies on shear strength. Builders create this strength by nailing large sheets of plywood, or OSB, sheathing to the studs. This skin locks the vertical studs together, creating a rigid panel that refuses to slide or tilt sideways. Finally, the frame must handle bending forces, particularly in the floors and roof. When you walk across a room, the floor joists under your feet experience 2 forces at once. The top of the board is being squeezed, in compression, while that bottom is being stretched apart in tension. The ability of a beam to resist this bending without snapping or bouncing too much depends on its shape and material stiffness, measured as the modulus of elasticity. This is why floor joists are always turned on their edge. The taller the beam, the higher its area moment of inertia, which is a fancy physics term for how well a shape resists bending. By carefully balancing compression, shear, and bending resistance, a frame keeps the house standing through storms, snow, and daily life. The reason that these skinnier but deeper joists can handle more weight than the logs is because the formula for area moment of inertia is base times height to the third power. And that third power on a larger piece of wood, or a deeper piece, is much bigger than, say, a 6-inch log, like it is in this case. And these forces acting on a house have to be resisted by the framing. The reason the skinny sticks, the 2x4's, work is because we don't rely on just one of them. We create a system.
Dad, you're a nerd, but I love you. But what do these loads look like? Do you have an example?
Yeah, in a typical 2-story residential home like ours, a single load-bearing 2x4 stud on the bottom floor supports a surprising amount of weight, but it is well within the wood's capacity. The actual load on a single bottom floor exterior stud is typically between 1,200 and 1,800 pounds. Here is how that weight breaks down for a stud spaced 16 inches apart following the load from the roof to the foundation. First, the roof load, which is about 600 to 900 pounds. The stud holds up a slice of the roof about 16 inches wide. This includes the heavy shingles, plywood, and any snow load, which varies by region. Next, we have the second floor load, which would be like 500 to 800 pounds. The stud carries the weight of the floor joists, furniture, and people on the second floor above it.
What if we have 7 kids? Do you think the engineers planned on that?
That's accounted for in the factor of safety. I'll explain in a few. And next you have the wall above, about 100 to 200 pounds. It also supports the weight of the second story 2x4's, drywall, and siding directly above it. While supporting about 1,500 pounds sounds like a lot, a standard 8-foot SPF No. 2 2x4 stud, when braced by drywall and sheathing, has a safe working load capacity of roughly 3,000 to 4,000 pounds before it approaches the code limits, and its ultimate crushing failure point is often over 10,000 pounds. So this is a factor of safety.
Then why do we use so many studs if they're that strong?
We don't space them 16 inches apart because the wood is weak. We do it for stiffness, to stop the wall from wobbling, redundancy, if one has a knot and breaks, the neighbor studs will take the load, and mostly to provide a convenient frequency for nailing up 4-foot sheets of drywall and plywood. And that's with 2x4's, although many newer homes are 2x6 construction. More on that later. So back in your initial question, those 2x4's are distributing the load of the house more evenly than one massive beam.
But the older part of the house does have fewer, more massive beams. When did we switch to this stick-built method?
This brings us to the history of the 3 revolutions. Since we are literally living in a timeline of construction, let's walk through our house. In 1815, you couldn't run down to a hardware store. Every nail was hand-forged by a blacksmith. They were precious. People would burn down old barns just to sift the ashes for the nails. Because they couldn't just nail things together, they used mortise and tenon joinery. A mortise is a square hole chiseled into the wood, and a tenon is a tongue cut on the end of another beam to fit that hole. They drilled a hole through both and hammered in a wooden peg, called a trunnel or a tree nail. This required master craftsmanship, and it required community. You couldn't lift these 8x8 beams alone. This was the era of the barn raising. The whole town would show up. Men lifted the walls with long poles, women fed the crowd. It was social and necessary. The strength came from the mass of the wood and the geometry of the joints. Then we had the second revolution, balloon framing. Balloon framing was born out of a perfect storm of necessity and industrial innovation in the American West. In the early 1830s, the frontier town of Chicago was growing explosively, but it lacked 2 critical things: skilled carpenters and massive timbers required for traditional heavy timber framing. In 1833, a builder named Augustin Snow was contracted to construct a warehouse, but he was short on the huge oak and pine beams needed. Fortunately, the Industrial Revolution had just delivered 2 major technological breakthroughs. Machine-made nails were now cheap and plentiful, and steam-powered sawmills could quickly churn out vast quantities of small, standardized boards, like the 2x4. Snow seized the moment, abandoning the complex, time-consuming joinery of the past. Instead, he used the light, milled lumber, securing the frame entirely with nails. He ran these studs continuously from the foundation to the roof, creating a light, cage-like structure. When the old school builders saw this delicate frame, they scoffed, calling it so flimsy a strong wind would blow it away like a balloon. The name stuck, but the design did not fail. Balloon framing was a revolutionary success because it was up to 5 times faster to erect and required far less skilled labor than traditional methods. This democratization of building meant that settlers, pioneers, and mass builders could quickly and cheaply construct homes and expand cities, fundamentally changing the landscape of American architecture. While the design was later found to have a fatal flaw, the continuous stud bays acted as a vertical chimney during a fire, its speed and efficiency fueled the rapid growth of the western United States.
It seems that we always sacrifice quality for quantity and speed. The timber frame homes look so much cooler.
Yes, but people still need to live somewhere. And then we had the third revolution, platform framing, the modern standard. The change from balloon framing to platform framing was driven primarily by 2 massive societal needs in the mid-20th century: increased fire safety and an unprecedented demand for mass housing efficiency following World War II. Balloon framing's primary flaw was revealed during the house fires, where the continuous stud channels acted like a vertical chimney, rapidly spraying the fire from the basement to the attic. While builders knew this was at risk, the economic pressures of rapid construction often outweighed safety concerns. However, the true catalyst for the shift was a post-war housing boom. Millions of returning GIs needed homes quickly and affordably. Traditional methods were too slow to keep up. This urgent necessity led to the standardization and optimization of construction, typified by developments like Levittown. Builders realized that by breaking the structure into horizontal, repetitive stages, building the floor first as a platform, then the walls on top of it, and then the next floor, they gained immense advantages. First, the floor deck provided a fire stop, preventing the chimney effect. Second, the flat, raised platform allowed a crew to prefabricate entire wall sections on the ground and then tilt them up, transforming construction into an assembly line process that required less specialized labor. This shift from continuous vertical construction to stacked horizontal platforms became the modern standard, making safe, affordable housing possible on a massive scale. And it's worth noting that although this is a conventional method, you can still build homes in a timber frame method today. My friend Paul just completed his post and beam home. He had the frame raising day and all. It looks amazing. And despite the old feel, there is a considerable amount of changes compared to 200 years ago, like Mortise chainsaws.
There's something else different too. The wood itself. The wood in the older part of the house doesn't smell like pine, but the new 2x4's you cut has that pine aroma. And every time when we go to the Home Depot, I notice stamps and funny writing on the wood. What's up with that?
I'm going to hand it to you. You figured me out. The stamps are the reason I'm doing a podcast on this home building series at all. A brief aside, I was perplexed by all the different stamps and symbols on the wood that I had to do a deep dive. Starting with plywood and then to nominal lumber, these stamps say a lot more than the untrained eye would believe. The stamps are the resume of the wood. This is a perfect segue into the fact that not all wood is created equal. A 2x4 is not just a 2x4. It's a highly engineered product. But first, let's address your first point. The wood is not the same in the older and newer parts of the house. Historically, builders didn't just grab wood. They selected specific species for specific jobs, just like a chef selects ingredients. Granted, sometimes they just use what they had, but different tree species have different building properties. Let's first look at the trees that were historically used for post and beam construction. First, eastern white pine, the colonial workhorse. This is likely what's in our walls. It grows incredibly straight and tall, up to 200 feet. It's soft and easy to work with hand tools, but it's not the strongest wood. And it has a fascinating story in American history. And as much as you know, I want to talk about its role in the American Revolution, I'm going to hold my tongue so you can go to bed tonight in a timely manner.
Yeah, last time you had me up until 9:30. I'm already tired.
Okay, I'll try not to make it that late tonight. So next we have the white oak, or the ironwood. In colonial timber frame construction, American white oak, Quercus alba, was highly valued for its exceptional density, hardness, and natural resistance to rot and insect infestation. Unlike softer woods, its durability made it the primary choice for critical structural components, particularly the sills, the massive timbers that rested directly on the foundation or ground. By minimizing decay at this vulnerable point of contact with moisture, white oak ensured the longevity of the entire frame. Its strength and resilience made it the material of choice for the core structure. Even when softer, easier to work woods like pine were used for non-load bearing elements. And then we have eastern hemlock, the cheap stuff. Often used in barns or hidden areas, it is abundant but notoriously splintery and difficult to plane smooth. Today we rely on different species. We have Douglas fir. It's the gold standard for framing out west. It's very stiff and strong, has a high modulus of elasticity, making it great for beams. Then we have southern yellow pine, SYP, the heavy lifter of the south. It's dense and heavy, and its grain structure soaks up pressure treatment chemicals perfectly. This is what your outdoor deck is made of. This isn't a tree species, but rather a lumber category that has tree species with similar structural properties. The four main species that fit in this category are loblolly pine, shortleaf pine, longleaf pine, and slash pine. And no, not all pines are created equal. I could make an entire episode on just the longleaf pine, but I won't yet.
Because you're a tree lover.
Not ashamed of it. Trees are awesome. Anyways, last we have SPF, or spruce pine fir. This is the modern commodity lumber, what you see in the big box stores a lot. It's a mix of white spruce, lodgepole pine, and alpine fir, and several other species. It's lightweight, grows fast, and it's easy to nail, but it's not as strong as the others.
I think you forgot something.
Like?
First, you haven't even talked about the stamps yet. Second, your favorite tree.
No, I didn't forget it. I wrote this script. The stamps are after the tree species. I just placed the best tree for last. How about you tell the audience about the last tree?
The American chestnut. Only the coolest tree ever.
Yes, and the entire sill, floor joists, and beams of this old house are made out of it. This brings us to the saddest chapter in American forestry, and why the wood in our living room is a piece of history you can't buy anymore. We are looking at the story of the American chestnut, the king of the forest. In 1815, when our living room was built, the American chestnut was the perfect tree. At least I think it was a perfect tree. It grew incredibly fast and straight. It was rot resistant because of natural tannins. It was one out of every 4 trees in the Appalachian Mountains, and it fed wildlife and the people with its nuts. Think of chestnuts roasting on an open fire. It was the backbone of early America. But around 1904, a fungus was accidentally introduced in trees imported from Asia. The American chestnut had no immunity. It was an airborne genocide for trees. By 1950, 4 billion chestnut trees were dead. The species was functionally wiped out, but just functionally. They sprout back from the stumps, and if you're lucky, you can still find them. You and I, Cecilia, have gone on chestnut hunts in the woods. They are all over if you know what to look for.
And we do. Lance-shaped serrated leaf is a telltale sign. Dad, the stamps. I'm here to keep you on track.
Thanks. Now about those stamps. They are a legal promise. There's a lot said on a stamp that DIYers may be completely unaware of. This is why I said earlier a 2x4 is not a 2x4. Well, this and another reason. For example, a stamp might read S dry SPF number 2 1.5E NLGA. Here's how to read the code. S dry, that's surface dry. This means the wood was kiln dried to remove moisture, usually below 19% before it was planed. SPF, this tells you the species mix, spruce, pine, fir. The number 2, this is the grade. Lumber graders look at the knots, the slope of the grain, and the wane, or the bark on the edge. And then we have select structural, best, strongest stuff, number 1 and number 2, standard for general framing like walls. And then we have stud grade, good for vertical loads, but might look ugly. And then NLGA, that's the agency that certifies a grader, National Lumber Grades Authority.
And the E?
That is a modulus of elasticity that we talked about earlier. It's one of the most critical properties for engineers designing floor and roof systems. A higher E means it's stiffer and will deflect less. In this case, the 1.5E means the modulus of elasticity is 1.5 million psi, which is used in engineering calculations.
Did I call you a nerd yet? That's a lot of info on a stamp. And I won't remember it all. But I will remember that SPF doesn't stand for sun protection factor in this context. Dad, does the grading process also explain how some pine doesn't feel as dense and heavy as other pines? I've noticed that some of the cutoffs you had weren't as heavy and dense as others, even when the wood looked similar.
I happen to have two cutoffs here. One from the 1940s edition. I had to replace a stud, and a recent cutoff from when I framed the window. Feel that? Similar species, I believe, but
This one feels heavier and has more rings. Smaller, closer rings. Why's that, Dad?
this is a real-life example of things not being made like they used to.
But people don't make trees.
No, they don't, but they do grow them. This leads us to the great downgrade. Remember from school that the rings tell you the age of the tree, and the smaller, tighter rings mean they grow slower. Great downgrade refers to the necessary re-rating of structural lumber strength, primarily from southern yellow pine around 2012 to 2013, which resulted in a reduction of up to 30% in its official load-bearing capacity. That's a lot. This change was a direct response to modern forestry practices. Unlike the dense, stiff, old-growth timber used to create the original engineering tables like 100 years ago, today's fast-grown plantation trees are harvested rapidly, resulting in lumber with a higher proportion of softer juvenile wood and less sturdy heartwood. Now, trees can be grown 3 to 5 times faster, so it ultimately is a net benefit, but a 30% reduction in strength? That's a lot. Anyways, rigorous scientific testing on over 7,000 samples confirmed that this modern, less dense wood was significantly weaker and less stiff. It has a lower modulus elasticity than its historical counterparts, forcing engineers to reduce the official design value to maintain structural safety margins in construction. This re-rating posed significant risk to DIYers who were unaware of the change, as they often relied on outdated span tables or decades-old construction knowledge. If a DIYer used a newly purchased 2x10 to replace a floor joist based on an older code, the new lumber might be asked to span a distance it was no longer structurally rated to handle. This led to projects that were unintentionally under-designed, resulting in noticeably bouncier floors and visible stability issues. Therefore, the key takeaway for homeowners is that a 2x6 bought today does not possess the same structural capability as one bought in the 1990s, making it essential to always consult the most recent span tables for the specific grade of lumber being used before undertaking any structural renovation.
That was more than I was ready to listen to. But I guess you're right. A 2x4 isn't just a 2x4. But looking at this measuring tape, it looks like it isn't even 2x4. Even the lumber company is skipping things nowadays. Why is that, Dad?
Yeah, this usually shocks people the first time they actually measure a stud. But I promise, you measured it correctly. This isn't actually 2x4 inches, but you're still paying for all of that 2x4. If you measure that stud in your hand, it's actually 1.5 inches by 3.5 inches. That's because when the log is first cut on the sawmill, it is rough cut to 2x4 inches. That's what you're paying for. But then two things happen. Drying. The wood goes into a kiln and it's dried. As the water leaves, the cells in the wood shrinks. Next, we have planing. To make the wood smooth and uniform and straight so it's easy to build with, high-speed blades shave off about a 1/4 inch from each side, making every piece uniform. So a 2x4 is just the nominal name, like calling a burger a 1/4 pounder, even though it weighs less after cooking. The actual dimension is the finished, dry, smooth product.
That makes sense. It shrinks like a wool sweater in the dryer. I'm never going to look at a wall the same way again. It's not just a wall. It's a history of trees and physics.
It really is, Cecilia, and that's exactly why you should know this. Our house, with its 1815 living room bones, its 1940s kitchen ribs, and its modern skin, is a living museum. It tells the story of how America solved problems, first with muscle, then with machines, and finally with engineering.
I definitely have X-ray vision now. But before I go to bed, I have a job to do.
You certainly do. Hit the audience with the trivia.
Okay, everyone. See if you were listening. Here are 3 questions based on today's episode. What was the insulting name given to the lightweight framing style invented in Chicago in 1833 because critics thought it would blow away? A modern 2x4 doesn't measure 2 inches by 4 inches. What are its actual measurements? What is the name of the perfect tree species that built early America but was wiped out by a fungal blight in the early 1900s?
Great questions. If you know the answers, yell them at your dashboard or put them in the comments. If you answer the trivia questions correctly, we may mention your name during the next episode. And post your most satisfying experiences doing construction, and we'll mention that too. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the bones of America, please leave us a 5-star review in your podcast app. It helps us buy more lumber for this never-ending renovation. And if you want to see the visual examples of this framing types, check out my YouTube channel, Contemplative Chaos. Thanks for listening to Why Is That, Dad? Keep asking questions and keep looking at the world closely. And remember, even the walls have a story to tell.